I need to read off of my iPad. I can't memorize this. I need to read off my iPad. I completely forfeit myself to accepting that no amount of understanding or research will give this topic the amount of nuance or insight that it deserves. No matter what I say, someone's going to be mad about it. But nevertheless, it's important, and I feel like I need to talk about it. 1947, the partition of India. While I was studying, it didn't take a long time for me to realize how white my cohort was when it was just me and a handful of other colored people graduating. In one of my literary courses, I was asked to make a presentation on Sarah Jeanette Duncan's story, The Pool in the Desert. And I will never forget my TA's email to me after the presentation where he said, and I quote, "It was really impressive how you interrogated the story's blind spots and used personal details to elucidate aspects of the text for your classmates." I had to Google what elucidate meant. Now, originally written in 1903, Duncan's text explores the impact of an isolated yet aristocratic lifestyle within the then British Raj. The protagonist, Mrs. Farnham, navigates motherhood, her marriage, and societal expectations against the backdrop of a colonial life. It's an interesting and unfortunately relatable text embedded with the struggles of womanhood and motherhood, where she lives with the liberties and fruits of the British Empire but is met with the loneliness of never entirely adjusting to a foreign land due to the constraints of small military societies of the time. She's disconnected with her daughter, who was raised in England, and has a strained relationship with her militant husband. And in essence, her life is dictated by her experience with colonization. Now, all these themes were explored in class, which went entirely over my head when I first read the text. My presentation explored everything that the text wasn't about, which is what I think took my TA by surprise. For some context, I'm about to get real passionate. For some context, the active influence of British powers in India lasted over 200 years with their establishment of the East India Company in 1600. And before the British happened, India was economically thriving. It was a mosaic of kingdoms, religions, and cultures that coexisted with one another. In the 18th century, India made up for 27% of the world's GDP. That's a percentage greater than all of Europe combined. I made myself learn what a GDP was for this video, and now I'm even angrier. Textiles like cotton, silk, spices like pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, diamonds, gems, emeralds, iron, copper, tea, everything. India had everything. It was a gold mine that the British bled dry, and after the occupation, India's GDP was less than 3%. The British taxed everything and anything they could get their hands on, enforcing peasantry upon labor workers in India, where they were taxed more than their income. India was an extracted British colony where the wealth of the country wasn't redistributed into itself, but rather to England, and approximately $43 trillion was rinsed from the country. Then comes the argument that, hey, at least the British introduced the railway system to India. This is ignoring the plausibility that India could have conjured up their own transportation system had they been allowed to flourish outside of colonized rule. And the railway system was not enforced to better the country, but rather to expedite exploitation where agriculture and natural resources were extracted at a national and alarming scale. In essence, the railway system was built by indentured Indians, paid for by Indian taxes, and were prohibited for use by Indians until the British had rid themselves of India entirely. An approximate 35 million deaths were caused by the famine induced by British exploitation at the time, being one of the largest and most avoidable famines in world history. To put this into context, there has not been a single large-scale famine in India since the abolition of British rule. And do I need to mention slavery? The British abolished slavery in 1833 only to reinforce Indian indentured work, where they sent Indians to European colonies to substitute African laborers. This is the reason why our men are in places like Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago and such. Now, none of this is shocking or new, and this is all information I've paraphrased from a couple articles and a couple documentaries, but this is pre-partition India. In my presentation for Duncan's text, The Pool in the Desert, we were asked to explore a certain theme that came within the reading and share it, and I obviously didn't do that. The only thing I could focus on was everything that the text was ignoring, which was Indians. We often regard literature as a blast from the past or relics of history, but this wasn't that. This wasn't some Geoffrey Chaucer or William Shakespeare piece of work. Duncan's text takes place only 3 generations before me. The history of the partition, which only happened some 70 odd years ago, is the history that my late grandparents would share with me. They were alive and well, but they were children. The mutiny and strife that the partition brought is what my grandparents built their livelihoods on. I'm half Indian and half Pakistani on my mom and dad's side respectively, and I always got jokes about the partition and how I'm a symbol of the 2 countries coming together. Didn't age too well because my parents were divorced, so... But I've always identified more with my Pakistani side, as that's the family that I grew up with, and whatever Indian heritage I've come to know of has only shed its light in recent years through reconnection with family members. I've always heard rhetoric against Indians growing up, both in a joking and serious context, and the same goes the other way. It was weird, but I never really tried to make any sense of it because India-Pakistan beef is nothing new to anybody, and especially not in this day and age, and I never really deeped it until now. Pakistan and India's Independence Days are widely celebrated, with both of them being only a day apart. Everyone becomes a proud nationalist on the 14th and 15th of August every year without fail, but how did this partition come to be? India had and still has a Hindu majority population, with the largest minority being Muslim, followed by Sikhs, Christians, Parsis, and so on. Hindu and Muslim tensions were obviously prevalent before British colonization, but overall they seem to coexist amongst one another for the most part. After the pressures and expenses of World War II, wherein the Indian Army enlisted a voluntary 2.5 million troops to the cause, British colonial forces realized that they couldn't afford ruling India anymore. Mountbatten was appointed as India's last viceroy and was given the task of overseeing India's independence by June 1948, with the aims of maintaining a united India with an easy-peasy British withdrawal. He expedited the partition by nearly a year and appointed none other than Barrister Radcliffe to dictate the separation of the country, a lawyer who had never been to India before being given this task. He was given around 40 days to devise the division of over 390 million people. He curated his plan on outdated maps and census reports because it was too hot to conduct any field work in June of that year. He finished his maps 2 weeks before partition, effectively creating India as a Hindu state and East and West Pakistan, now known as Bangladesh and Pakistan, respectively, as Muslim states. Mountbatten inaugurated the independence for both states on the 14th and 15th of August 1947, without mentioning the new borders. The new map was revealed 2 days later, on August 17th, 1947. I'm pissed. God. Nobody was prepared for the aftermath of bloodshed and tyranny that was to come from the partition. Around 14.5 million people crossed borders in hopes of seeking safety, with the region of Punjab harboring the worst of it all. Mountbatten and partisans claimed an estimated 200,000 people died during the migration, when a census report later revealed that over 2.2 million people were left unaccounted for in Punjab alone. People migrated through any means possible, by foot or by bullock carts, traveling up to 30 kilometers per day. Aside from dying by dehydration, famine, exhaustion, or disease brought by the refugee camps across the country, women bore the brunt of the terror. Many women were raped, kidnapped, killed, mutilated, or forced to marry their captors, and many were slaughtered or commit suicide by the hands of their own people as to spare them further anguish and shame from what was to come to them. Thousands of Muslims and Hindus were killed in the ghost train massacres. Trains were scheduled to transport refugees from one side of the nation to the other, and extremist mobs would massacre its passengers, leaving a cargo of corpses to arrive at their destination. The figures of deaths and lives unaccounted for are all estimates, and nobody knows the totality of lives lost. And this is only the tip of the iceberg from incidents that were actually reported. Learning about all this leaves me with a deep pit in my stomach, and there's not much else I can do about this history except accept it. What saddens me most is that the rhetoric that was once introduced by our oppressors are carried on almost pridefully through us, and more than anything, the partition birthed a deep-rooted divide among South Asians in psychology and ideology. It destroyed the unity we once had and replaced it with hatred towards the people we're the most similar to, leading to irreversible damages as a result. I'm not talking about the war crimes going on right now. I'm talking about the cultural significance of being white, fair and lovely, British schools in India and Pakistan being the best schools, like Beacon House, having a British dialect when you speak when you're aristocratic in India and Pakistan. It's so dumb. It pisses me off, and I'm speaking on behalf of countries that I'm not even really a part of, and I'm the last person that should be really discussing this. And as I'm saying this, I don't really know what I want my audience to feel because I don't really know how I feel myself. Everything I've just said is a very condensed version of the reality of what the partition was. There's no simple solution for a conflict that no longer feels tangible, and I can't expect everyone to reconcile, nor can I blur the deep divides that still exist, and rightly so for those who hold on to them. I find myself grieving for the suffering that went untold, the losses that numbers could never capture, and for what might have been had history unfolded differently. The partition and its aftermath redirected the lives of millions, including mine. Its vast, overwhelming consequences makes me cringe at the disdain I once felt towards my own nations. I'm here living with privilege and opportunity because of my ancestors, whose choices and sacrifices I now begin to understand. Studying the partition has put into context the behaviors of those that I grew up with, my elders that I learned everything from. I don't know what comes next. I don't know what to do with everything that I've just said, but I felt the need to say it. This is history that's connected to a lot of South Asians, and I think it's history that a lot of South Asians don't know about or neglect. I guess I'm just doing my part by reigniting the conversation. Again, I don't really know what can be done with it. I don't know what... I wish I could fix everything, but I can't. That's basically what it is. I wish I could fix it, but I can't. So the only thing I can do is talk about it, so that's what I'm doing. Yeah.